Hi guys, today is our very first day of school closure. I thought I'd try to keep it as teachery real as possible. And so I thought I'd write, today is Thursday, March 19th, 2020, day one of missing my kiddos. And you know what guys? I do miss you already. I really do. I want to make sure that you guys are, and I know it's the first day, so you're probably like, this is awesome. But some of you might be feeling like you really would rather be at school because you miss your friends, or maybe you miss me or somebody else at work, or at school. So maybe I just want you to make sure that you're being okay with things, and if you need help, if you need to talk to anybody, you can talk to your parents or maybe somebody else in your family. You can also have your parents email me and you can type to me. I'll be checking my email from school every day. So you can do that. And yes, I put a calendar behind me because I'm I love calendars. Anyway, we are on day 2 here with, as far as reading Henry and Ribsy by Beverly Cleary. And I'm on chapter 2, I should have said. Henry and the Garbage. 2 weeks before school started, Henry Huggins was in the kitchen one evening feeding Ribsy, while Mr. Huggins washed the dinner dishes and Mrs. Huggins wiped them. Henry took some horse meat and half a can of Wolfie's dog food out of the refrigerator. Thump, thump, thump went Ribsy's tail on the floor as he watched Henry. Henry cut up the horse meat and put it on Ribsy's dish. "Why don't you chew it?" he asked when Ribsy began to gulp down the pieces of meat. Henry spooned the last of the can of Wolfie's into the plastic dog dish with D-O-G printed on it. Ribsy sniffed at the food, and then he wagged his tail and looked hopefully at Henry, who knew this meant that Ribsy would eat the dog food only when he was sure he was not going to get any more horse meat. "That's all," said Henry. "Eat your Wolfies like a good dog. A Wolfie's dog is a happy dog. See? It says so right here on the can." "Woof," said Ribsy, and went to the refrigerator to show that what he really wanted was another piece of horse meat. "All right, just one more piece," said Henry, opening the refrigerator door. "You've stayed out of trouble for nearly 2 weeks, so I guess you deserve it." Mrs. Huggins hung up the dish towel. Henry started to put the empty Wolfie's can in the step-on garbage can his mother kept under the sink. Mr. Huggins stepped aside to let Henry pull it out. Henry did not have to step on the pedal to raise the lid. Have you seen that kind? The lid was already up. Because the can was so full of garbage, it wouldn't close. Ribsy came over to sniff, just in case someone had thrown away a bone by mistake. Henry carefully balanced the Wolfie's can on top of some potato peelings. He was about to push the can back under the sink when his mother spoke. "I am tired of taking out the garbage," she announced firmly. Henry and his father looked at each other. Then Mr. Huggins said, "Henry, your mother is tired of taking out the garbage." Henry didn't say anything. He didn't want to get mixed up in garbage. "I have taken out the garbage every day for 11 years, said Mrs. Huggins. 11 years, said Mr. Huggins. "Think of it. Day in and day out," said Mrs. Huggins and laughed. "Year after year." Mr. Huggins went on. Henry did not see why his mother and father thought this was so funny. He couldn't say he was tired of taking out the garbage because he had never taken it out. Instead, he said, "Well, so long. I'm supposed to go over to Robert's house to work on his electric train." "Just a minute, Henry," said his father. "It's just as much your garbage as it is ours." Well, Henry didn't think that was very amusing. "Ah," he muttered. He didn't want to have anything to do with smelly old garbage. None of the other kids on Klickitat Street took out garbage, at least not every day. "I'll tell you what I'll do," said Mr. Huggins. "I'll raise your allowance 15 cents a week if you'll take out the garbage." "You mean every day?" asked Henry, in case his father might mean every other day. He eyed the heaped up can. Garbage? Ugh. He could understand his mother's being tired of it all right. "Every day," his father said firmly. "Maybe there's something else I could do to earn 15 cents, Henry suggested hopefully. "Something like... "Nope," said his father. "Just garbage." Henry thought. His allowance was now 25 cents a week. That plus 10 cents made, so 25 plus 10, Figure that out. Okay, that makes 35 cents, plus you add another nickel. 35 plus 5. Did you get it? Makes 40 cents. He could find lots of uses for the extra money. Most fathers would just say, take out the garbage, without offering to pay for the job. I'm kind of one of those parents. Take out the garbage anyway. And there probably were worse things than garbage, although right now Henry couldn't think what. Besides, if he didn't say yes, his father might tell him he had to take it out anyway. Okay, it's a deal, said Henry, without really much enthusiasm. He held his nose with one hand and lifted the garbage container out of the step-on can with the other. Oh, it's not as bad as all that, said Mrs. Huggins cheerfully. It's nice, fresh garbage. Ribsy followed Henry out the back door, sniffing as he went, and watched Henry lift the lid off the 30-gallon galvanized metal can that was just like the can standing by the back door of every other house on Klickitat Street. Henry peered into the can, which was half full of garbage. Ribsy put his paws on the edge of the can, and he peered in too. Most of the garbage was wrapped in newspapers, so it wasn't so bad as Henry had expected. However, some of the juicier garbage had soaked through the paper. Ugh, and the whole thing was pretty smelly, especially a couple of old tuna fish cans. Blech. Henry emptied the container and took it back into the kitchen. Then he and Ribsy went over to Robert's house. So this is the kind of can that everyone on Klickitat Street has. They did not have, back then, a garden can and one for recycling and one for just trash. They only had this. That week, Henry took out the garbage every day. His mother never had to remind him more than twice. By the end of the week, the can was full of soggy newspapers, old dog food cans, pea pods, grass clippings, chicken bones, which Ribsy was not allowed to chew because dogs choke on them, so don't let them have that. Used tea bags and dabs of this and that, all blended into a tangled, smelly mess. So a lot of those things could have been recycled. So this is how it's so much better that way of recycling now. But back then, no. So everything was all in one big giant can. Ugh. Henry could not keep from peering into the can to see just how awful it was. Ugh, thought Henry, and hoped he wouldn't have to take the garbage out for 11 years. He wondered how much one of those electric garbage chopper-uppers cost that some people have installed in their sinks. And what he's talking about is the garbage disposal that's in your kitchen that hopefully your parents have told you never to touch. And you turn on the switch and it chews up all the leftover food and stuff like that. That's what he's talking about. They don't even have that. Henry had never thought much about Monday before, but now it was an important day. The day the garbage man emptied the can and hauled away the garbage. Then Henry could start all over with a new set of smells. Monday morning, Robert and Scooter came over to Henry's house to see what they could find to do. Scooter tinkled with the chain on his bicycle, Henry held one end of a rope while Ribsy tugged at the other end, and Robert sat on the front steps and thought. In the distance, Henry could hear the rattle and the thump of the garbage cans as the garbage man emptied them. Robert spoke first. There was this girl in my room at school last year who was double-jointed. That's nothing. So am I, boasted Scooter. See how far back I can pull my thumb? So I miss you guys because I always had my kids in the class. Some kids can always do this kind of thing. They're like double jointed. They can make their finger like be bent and weird stuff. I'm not double jointed. And he's saying that his friend could bend his thumb all the way back like that, but not push it. He can just do it on his own. Well, I can't do that. But maybe some of you can, and I'm hoping maybe somebody will email me and say, yeah, I am. But this is the part that I miss about having that classroom interaction. Anyway, Henry, let's see. The rattles and the thumps of the garbage cans were growing louder, Henry thought, and the garbage men must be almost at his house. Oh, you guys aren't really double jointed, said Robert. This girl in my room could bend her finger backwards without pushing them with her other hand. The garbage truck had stopped between the Hugginses and the Grumby's house. The boys watched two big men get out of the truck and balance their barrels on their shoulders. One went across the street to pick up garbage. The other walked up the driveway between Henry's house and the house next door. The boys forgot about double joints. Gee, I hope I have muscles like that someday, said Robert. Henry didn't answer. He noticed that Ribsy had dropped his end of the rope and he was looking anxiously toward the back of the house. He heard the thump of the Grumby's garbage can. The man came down the driveway with his barrel full of the Grumby's garbage, emptied it into the truck, and walked up the driveway with the barrel once more. Ribsy watched every move he made. Then Henry heard the man take the lid off the Huggins' can. Ribsy growled deep in his throat. Henry looked at him anxiously. It was the first time he had ever heard him growl anything except for a pretend growl. Suddenly, Ribsy flew into a frenzy of barking, and he tore down the driveway toward the back of the house. Henry was too shocked to move. He sat listening to Ribsy snarl and bark. Ribsy? He couldn't believe it. Not good old Ribsy. Now he really was in trouble. Scooter was the first to move. "Boy, is he mad about something," he exclaimed, and he ran over to the driveway. Then Henry got into action. He started down the driveway, but what he saw made him stop. Ribsy was growling and jumping at the garbage man, who was using his empty barrel to protect himself. "Ribsy!" wailed Henry. "Cut that out!" Ribsy continued to snarl and advance, while the garbage man retreated down the driveway behind his barrel. When Henry tried to grab Ribsy, the garbage man picked up his barrel and ran toward the truck. He threw the barrel up onto the garbage in the back of his truck and jumped inside the cab. Ribsy had his front paws on the running board before Henry could even grab him by the collar. "You keep that dog closed up or keep your garbage. You understand?" The garbage man glared at Ribsy, who was still growling deep in his throat. "But he's not really a fierce dog," protested Henry, while Ribsy strained so hard at his collar that he choked and coughed. "Not much he is it," said the garbage man. "You keep him closed up when I come around, see?" "Yes, sir." Henry knew he couldn't explain that Ribsy wasn't a fierce dog, not after the way he was behaving. And here's a picture. So, yeah, looks like Ribsy's pretty vicious right there. As soon as the garbage man drove on, Ribsy stopped growling. He looked at Henry and wagged his tail as if he expected to be praised for what he had done. Henry was too stunned to say anything for a minute, and then he said crossly, "Now look what you've done! You've got us both in trouble, that's what!" Henry scowled at his dog. His father had told him he must keep Ribsy out of trouble if he wanted to go salmon fishing, and now, for no reason at all, Ribsy had attacked the garbage man, and if he had bitten the garbage man, oh boy. Well, Henry could not bring himself to think about it because he knew that biting dogs were sent to the pound. Scooter was careful to stay a few feet away from Ribsy. "I wouldn't get too close to him if I were you. He looks pretty ferocious," he said. Henry looked sadly at Ribsy, who had rolled over on his back with his 4 feet in the air to show that he wanted his tummy scratched. "See, he's not ferocious." Henry was anxious to defend his dog, even though he knew he couldn't convince Scooter. "You just saw him, didn't you?" asked Scooter. "But that wasn't like Ribsy," protested Robert. "He's a good dog." Henry noticed that even though Robert defended Ribsy, he was careful to stay away from him, too. "Oh, I don't know," said Scooter. "You never can tell about dogs. Sometimes they just get mean." "Not my dog," said Henry, trying frantically to think of an explanation for Ribsy's behavior. "Maybe he just doesn't like garbage men." That gave him a better idea. "Say, maybe the garbage man reminds Ribsy of the vet," he said excitedly. "Once when Ribsy got foxtails in his ears from running through some tall grass, we had to take him to the vet and have them taken out. The vet had to hurt Ribsy to get the foxtails out of his ears, and for a long time afterwards, every time I got a haircut, Ribsy would sit outside the barber shop and bark at the barber because he wore a white coat like the vet." "I suppose Ribsy thought you went to the barber to have foxtails taken out of your ears," said Scooter. "Besides, the garbage man doesn't wear a white coat. He wears blue overalls." Leave it to old Scooter to spoil that explanation. "All right, I guess that's right," Henry answered dejectedly. How did he get mixed up in things like this? He had been sitting on the front steps just minding his own business, and now all of a sudden he was in trouble. The worst of it was Scooter had seen the whole thing. Now everyone on Klickitat Street would know about Ribsy. And then Henry realized he had another problem. The garbage. A whole week's collection was still in the can in the backyard. What was worse, it was going to stay there for 7 more days until the garbage man came around again. What was he going to do with the garbage he had to take out until then? That evening, Henry put off telling his mother and father what had happened until they were washing dishes and he was cutting up horse meat for Ribsy. They both looked really serious. I can't understand it, said Mrs. Huggins. He's always been such a good-natured animal. If he really is getting to be ferocious, maybe we should keep him tied up. Oh, no, Mom, protested Henry. He hates to be tied up. And anyway, he always chews through the rope. Henry hoped his mother would not mention buying a chain. Why, he wouldn't have any fun with Ribsy chained up in the yard, not even riding his bike. It wouldn't be the same without Ribsy riding in the box, tied in the back fender, or running along beside him. There must be some reason for his not liking the garbage man, said Mr. Huggins. I wonder if the garbage man ever kicked him. Gee, Dad, do you think so? Henry asked eagerly. Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't do that, said Mrs. Huggins. Henry was anxious to change the subject before anything more was said about tying Ribsy in the backyard. He lifted the container out of the step-on garbage can and started to go out. And then with a groan, he remembered that the can outside was already full. Jeepers, Mom, what'll I do with the garbage? He asked. You'll just have to manage the best you can. Push it down in the can somehow. Mrs. Huggins wiped a cup and sighed. Henry, I don't know how you get mixed up in things the way you do. Henry emptied the container on top of the garbage in the big can and tried to put the lid on again. He pushed it down as hard as he could, but it wouldn't close. The can was extra full because Mr. Huggins had mowed the lawn again and emptied the grass clippings into it. Of course, nowadays we have the green can that we put our garden stuff in, right? You old dog, you, Henry said crossly to Ribsy, who was sniffing the can. It'll be all your fault if I don't get to go fishing. Ribsy sat down and scratched a flea while Henry stared gloomily at the garbage can. There was one thing he was sure of. When he grew up and he had a boy of his own, he would never ask him to take out the garbage. Yeah, right. Unfortunately, that week turned out to be unusually warm. Tuesday evening, when Henry and his mother and father were eating dinner, a breeze moved the curtains in the dining room window. Whew, P.U., said Henry, catching a whiff of overripe garbage from the can below. That just means like stuff is kind of starting to rot. Never mind the sound effects, said Mr. Huggins, as he got up from the table to close the window. This made it very warm in the dining room. I don't think they have air conditioning in their house. It was even warmer in the kitchen when Henry's mother and father were washing and wiping dishes. Mrs. Huggins had to put down the dish towel several times to swat flies. Henry fed Ribsy in silence. He dreaded the trip to the garbage can. When he could put it off no longer, he picked up the container and started out, followed closely by Ribsy. This time he arranged the day's refuse a handful at a time around the pile, and then he balanced the lid on top. The whole thing looked and smelled terrible. On Wednesday, when Henry walked reluctantly down the back steps with the garbage, he saw Mr. Grumby standing on the back porch. As Henry took the lid off the can, Mr. Grumby looked across the driveway. Oh, so that's where the smell's coming from, he said. I'm afraid it is, Mr. Grumby, answered Henry. I heard about Ribsy tearing the seat out of the garbage man's overalls, said Mr. Grumby. Did that really happen? No. But see how rumors get spread and they get worse and they get worse? That's what happened. Ribsy never even touched the garbage man, but now Mr. Grumby thinks he ripped the seat out of his pants. Jeepers, thought Henry miserably. The story's not only going around the neighborhood, it's getting worse than it really was. Next thing people would be saying that Ribsy bit the garbage man. He explained what had really happened, and then Mr. Grumby went in and closed all the windows that faced the Huggins' house. Henry grew more and more discouraged. On Thursday, after he had piled the garbage on top of the can and replaced the lid as well as he could, he got an apple box out of the garage, climbed up on it, and stepped carefully onto the lid. He stamped his feet a few times to work the garbage down into the can and then jumped up and down. It helped some, but not much. There's Henry. What a dilemma. On Friday, Henry suggested to his mother that they buy a second garbage can, but she did not like that idea. Then Henry decided to take the garbage out before dinner when the container wasn't so full. He distributed the milk cartons and carrot tops as well as he could on the heap and was jumping up and down on the lid when Robert and Scooter came up the driveway looking for him. What are you doing up there? Robert demanded, with one eye on Ribsy. Look at it, Scooter. Did you ever see so much garbage? P.U., said Scooter, staying on the driveway well away from Ribsy, who was rolling on the grass to scratch his back. Never mind the sound effects. Henry jumped to the ground. It was all right for him to criticize his own garbage, but he didn't want anybody else to do it. Come on, let's go out front. Yeah, let's, said Scooter. P.U. Henry was about to suggest they all go over to the park, and then he decided he had better not take a chance on Ribsy's behavior towards strangers. "Come on, let's see who can walk farthest on his hands," he said, to keep Scooter and Robert from talking about his troubles. While the three boys were busy trying to walk across the lawn on their hands, they heard a sudden clatter and a crash from the backyard and promptly got on their feet. "Sounds like a garbage can to me," said Scooter. "Ugh!" Henry, who had known instantly what made that noise, was already on his way around the house with Ribsy at his heels. Scooter and Robert were close behind. Henry found the garbage can tipped on its side. The lid had rolled halfway across the backyard. The garbage was strewn all the way from the steps to the cherry tree. In the midst of the litter stood a collie and another big dog. A crust of bread hung from the collie's mouth. The dogs started to run when they saw the boys. Ribsy chased them while Henry grabbed an old Woofie's can and threw it after them. "You beat it!" he yelled. And then he looked at the mess and groaned. "Garbage! Ugh!" He was sick and tired of it. He kicked in an eggshell and groaned again. This was not worth 15 cents a week. It wasn't worth $100 or $1,000 or even $1 million. Scooter and Robert held their noses. Then Scooter made a gagging noise and Robert copied him. "Aw, fellas, cut it out!" Henry glared at his friends and pulled the can, still half full, upright. He looked around and sighed. And here he is, throwing a can at the dogs that were digging through the garbage. Because remember I told you they don't have any fences around their backyards there, or at least at that time. So dogs could just roam free through people's backyards, and that's what they did. "Well, I guess I better be going," said Scooter. "I just remembered I'm supposed to go to the store for my mom." "Oh yeah, me too," said Robert. "Bye, Henry." Some friends, thought Henry, and he set to work. He was busy scooping up coffee grounds and mildewed pea pods when he heard his father's car turn into the driveway. Mr. Huggins looked around in the backyard. "Dogs?" he asked. "Yeah, that collie and that other big dog down the street," answered Henry. Mr. Huggins did not say anything. He found a shovel in the garage and went to work. "Dad," began Henry, "the garbage man isn't exactly a neighbor. Does his complaining about Ribsy mean I don't get to go fishing with you?" "We'll see what happens Monday before we decide," answered his father. "Perhaps we can find out what made him act that way." On Saturday, Henry did not take the garbage out at all. When neither his mother nor his father reminded him, he guessed they must be tired of garbage as he was. Sunday afternoon, Robert and Scooter came over to see if anything new had happened to the garbage or to Ribsy. "Oh, fellas, forget it," said Henry. Then he saw Beezus and her little sister Ramona coming down the street. Beezus' real name was Beatrice, right? But Ramona called her Beezus, and everyone else did too. "Hi!" Henry was glad to be interrupted. "Hello, Henry. Did the garbage man ever take away your garbage?" Beezus asked. "He'll take it tomorrow," Henry said coldly. Man, the way things got around on Klickitat Street. "Ramona, look out!" screamed Beezus. She rushed over to her little sister, who had a firm hold on Ribsy's tail and was pulling as hard as she could. "He bites!" said Beezus. "He bit the garbage man." "He did not bite the garbage man," yelled Henry. "Don't you dare say he did." And there's Ramona pulling on Ribsy. Holy cow. That girl. Ribsy looked around at Ramona. "Woof," he said mildly, and waited patiently while Beezus frantically pried Ramona's fingers loose from his tail. "He didn't bite when Ramona pulled his tail, did he?" Henry asked angrily. "No." Beezus looked doubtfully at Ribsy. "But somebody told Mother he bit the garbage man." "Oh, for Pete's sake!" Henry was thoroughly disgusted. This was too much. "Of course you don't know what Ribsy would have done if he had gotten at the garbage man," said Scooter. "Keep quiet!" Henry glared at Scooter. "The garbage man must have kicked him or something. Look at him. Does he look the least bit cross?" Beezus and the boys looked at Ribsy, who lay on the grass with a patient look on his face. Ramona was sitting on him. When she grabbed his ear, Ribsy looked at Henry as if to say, "Get her off me, will ya?" And there's Ramona sitting on Ribsy. This is a long chapter, my friends. Good gravy. "No, he doesn't look a bit cross," admitted Beezus, pulling her little sister away. "He seems to understand she's little and doesn't know any better." thinking secretly that Ramona should know better. Henry turned to Scooter. "Now are you satisfied?" he demanded. Well, Scooter was not easy to satisfy. Henry tried to think of something, anything, to change the subject. "Say, Scooter," he said, "I wish you would take a look at the horn on my bike. It's been sounding kind of funny lately." "Sure," said Scooter eagerly. If there was one thing he enjoyed, it was tinkering with a bicycle. "Where is it?" "In the garage," answered Henry, and they all started down the driveway toward the open garage doors. As Scooter took hold of the handlebars and started to wheel the bike out of the garage, Ribsy began to growl deep in his throat. The hair stood up on his neck and he moved toward Scooter. Everyone stared at Ribsy. Scooter hastily dropped the bike on the driveway and Ribsy stopped growling at once. He went to Henry and wagged his tail, waiting to be praised. "Did you see that?" Henry shouted. "I sure did," said Scooter. "He's a vicious dog." "He's not vicious. He's protecting my bike." Henry was growing more excited. "He isn't cross at all. He was just protecting my bike." Scooter didn't look convinced. "Don't you see?" Henry went on. "That explains about the garbage man. Ribsy was protecting the garbage from the garbage man because he thought it was mine." "He's a watchdog," agreed Beezus. "Sure," said Henry eagerly. "It takes a smart dog to be a watchdog." At this, Robert and Scooter began to shout with laughter. "What a watchdog," said Scooter. "Who ever heard of a dog guarding garbage?" Robert doubled up with laughter. "Valuable garbage," said Scooter. "Precious garbage," said Robert. "Cut it out," said Henry sheepishly, and he began to laugh, partly because he thought it was funny, mostly from the relief at proving that Ribsy was not a vicious dog. His fishing trip was still safe. Robert and Scooter whooped and pounded each other on the back. Ribsy, sensing that they were laughing at him, hung his head and slunk over to Henry, who hugged him and went on laughing. There's the boys making fun of Ribsy. Poor baby. "Boy, oh boy," gasped Scooter. "I can just see the Huggins' backyard a year from now with it 10 feet deep and Henry's own garbage that's precious and valuable," said Robert. Henry stopped laughing. The picture of his backyard 10 feet deep in garbage was too terrible to think about. Mr. Huggins appeared in the kitchen door. "What is all of this about?" he asked as he joined the group on the driveway. When he heard the story, he laughed too. He snapped his fingers at Ribsy, and when the dog bounded over to him, he slapped his side and said, "You're a pretty good dog, aren't you?" Ribsy wriggled with delight. Henry's friends, knowing it must be nearly dinner time, started to leave. "I'll look at your horn tomorrow if you'll get your bike out of the garage yourself," said Scooter. "Take good care of your garbage," said Robert. "Oh, keep quiet," answered Henry, and grinned. When the others were gone, he turned to his father. "Say, Dad, about this garbage?" "What about it?" asked his father. "Well, we didn't have any trouble with Ribsy protecting it from the garbage man when Mom took it out, and I was just wondering." Henry paused and looked at his father. Mr. Huggins smiled. "Wondering what?" "Well, I was just wondering if there wasn't something else you would rather have me do for the extra 15 cents than take out the garbage?" Mr. Huggins thought it over. "All right," he said. "I'll take out the garbage if you will clip around the edge of the lawn after I mow each week." It was Henry's turn to think it over. Clipping around the edge of the lawn was harder than taking out the garbage. It meant crawling around on his hands and knees for about an hour. So now we have they have those edgers that you just kind of scrape along the edge, or a weed eater or something. But he would have to crawl on his hands and knees and cut. Oh my. Still, as far as Henry knew now, there was no possible way either he or Ribsy could get into trouble doing that. "Okay, Dad, it's a deal," said Henry. "Okay," said Mr. Huggins, "but just make sure. We'd better put Ribsy in the basement when we hear the garbage man coming." "He won't mind for a little while," said Henry, giving the garbage can a good hard whack as he and his father went into the house. That was a long chapter. I'm sorry. I am now going to be doing chapter 3 next time. Henry gets a haircut. Okay, my friends. I love you. Please keep safe. Stay home as much as possible. Try not to get bored. Email me if you need anything. And please remember that I love all of you. Take care. Bye.